Hi, everybody. It's Stacey Calder from the Business Success Network podcast, and I am delighted today to have a very special guest I feel like they're going to be testing my interview skills because she's so good at creating her own podcast. We've got the amazing Catherine Williamson with us. Hello, Catherine.
Every bit of my ego was stroked with that intro. Well done.
I'm glad. I'm really glad. For those of you watching on YouTube, you'll see I'm just stroking at the moment. I'm visually stroking Catherine. For those of you that are listening, though, yes, we have Catherine, who I do feel is a bit of a, she's going to be critiquing me here because you are also a podcasting genius, aren't you?
Well, genius. I'm trying in this lifetime, Stacey, I'm trying to work on being humble. Now, I rather suspect, having managed a whopping ego all of my life, it's probably not going to happen in this lifetime. But I have managed to start a podcast and leverage a podcast, which is, as of a couple of weeks ago, I had a listen in a place called Reunion Island. And I've never even heard of Reunion Island. And it's the tiny little dot somewhere between Madagascar and Mauritius, I think. It's just in the Indian Ocean. And it's got a population of 860,000. And one person there has listened to me on Gobsmacked. And that's what I find so phenomenal about the times we live in, that, I've been an entrepreneur as such. I've run my own business for 24 years. And I think it's an incredible time to be alive. I really do. You and I would not be doing this today in the absence of this concept of podcast about bite-sized amounts of information to land in people, to give them and inform them and move them forward in their insights. And, and we've both found out our way to, this is a medium that suits our personality.
It makes the world feel a very small place, doesn't it? I've never heard of that island either, but it's just incredible. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today, so we've known each other. We've kind of been in and around each other's circles for quite a while now, a number of years. I've been on some of your training days and things like that. I know you've been to some of my networking. Who doesn't like to network with cocktails on a boat, that kind of thing. But something that always I've admired, and and actually watching you do this a couple of months ago, it's probably more than a couple of months ago, my time is flashing before me. You've got a podcast, which we're going to talk about. As you said, you've been very successful in business. Kind of, what was it that got you, what was it that made you decide you wanted to do a podcast?
It's not going to sound very strategic. It's not going to fulfill a KPI, and it's not going to sound of this world, but a dear friend of mine bought me a tarot card reading, and there's two things running in tandem here. And it was on Zoom. Now, my grandmother was an incredible psychic. She used to read the tea leaves. She stopped doing it, but she would do our tea leaves. So for me, immersion in a spiritual world was nothing. It was just my childhood. And so I've always had a bit of a dabble. Like to have a dabble anyway, but I couldn't see how does it work on Zoom, and I didn't understand it well enough to see how it worked on Zoom. But this guy comes on, Grant, and he said, well, I'm not really a tarot card reader, Catherine. He says, I'm more of a medium. Are you happy to be involved in a bit of mediumship? I said, bring it on. So he said, well, I'm ever so pleased because I've got a gentleman here that tells me he's your dad. And I went, okay, we're going in fast and we're going in hard anyway.
Yeah, there was no hanging around with that there, was there? That was straight in.
And basically this was the message that came from Catherine. You're out there as an executive coach, encouraging other people to raise the bar in their lives, do stuff that worries and confronts them because it's taking them out of comfort zone, and you're playing it too small in your own life. You're not taking enough risks, and you're not putting yourself out there enough. And I just went, Stacey, my dad was the teacher. He was archetypal headmaster. You just sat up straight. And I couldn't believe that 14 years after his death, actually, he was still telling me off from the other side.
I was going to say that message, the way you said that then sounded very teacher-like. And I'm guessing that was kind of, you would have heard it as him.
Well, it was like, sort of, right, okay. So I thought, okay, so thanks for the gentle lead-in. Well, independently of that, you remember the Muse, the coffee house in Leamington, which a lovely lady called Tracy started a business book club network. And she asked me, would I facilitate the first session? And it was a book called A High Five Habit by Mel Robbins. Honestly, in the first chapter, we're encouraged to go into the bathroom and high five ourselves in the bathroom mirror. And I just thought, if my pragmatic Cumbrian husband catches me high fiving myself in the bathroom mirror, I'm going to think I'm tapped. It's going to think, what I wanted to do with the high five habit was launch it across the bedroom as I just thought this is ridiculous. Anyway, because I'm facilitating the session, because I really care for Tracy, and because I don't want to look like somebody that hasn't prepped, I stick with the book. And you know what? It was such a divine bit of intervention, because what she talks about is having a book launch that goes catastrophically wrong. And thank the Lord that somewhere she had the wisdom to do an Audible download, and she put her book on Audible. She said you could hear the notes being rattled. She said it was really crude compared to what the book launch was meant to be. But because people can buy the book, they bought the Audible version of the book. And she said, what you got to do is you got to remember, I'm a communicator. So when I'm writing a book, I get utterly frustrated. But when I'm talking, it's effortless. And I just thought, you know what? Why am I vlogging? I was at the time starting my book, gobsmacked at the time. I'd written 5 pages, joined Mill Street, bought a fancy computer, wardrobe to be a writer, wrote 5 pages, lost them, couldn't find them for months. The convergent point of a podcast was that a chap called Paul Minter was a friend of my son's who was about to do 7,000 miles around the UK, raising awareness about PTSD and ex-service people. And I've always put on talks and done things at my home, and I've cooked dinner for people, and have about the most people I've ever had in the house was for a talk was 43, and it was for Alex Reid. Do you remember the cage fighter that was married to Katie Price? And the people just kept arriving, and I cooked dinner for everybody, and I just kept standing over the pot going, please be a meatball, please be a meatball. And then I went with the ladle, and everybody managed to get fed. So I do them for charity. So I thought, you know what? Coming off lockdown, I just didn't have the appetite to be cooking meals for 40 odd people when we've got these platforms. So I said, you know what, son? There's a podcast studio in Mill Street. I'm going to try and do a podcast. I'm going to have a play out of a podcast. And so Paul turns up, we go into the studio. I don't know what I'm doing. I've sent him 4 questions that essentially had the preparation of a fag packet level of, and we did a podcast, and looping back to the spiritual psychic medium bit. So I'm getting this bit from my dad bad about raise your bar, you're not be playing it too safe. And the tarot card reader said, I'm telling you, by the end of this year, you'll be global. And I just burst out laughing. I said, right, I am not and have never had any relationships with a rock star. I haven't got a love child stuck in my airing cupboard that I don't want the paparazzi to know about. I'm not being untoward with a politician. There's absolutely nothing in my life that's going to get me global. And he said, well, by the end of the year, you're going to be global. So Paul Minter, we did our podcast. Now I look back at it, I wonder if you're the same. And I had prepped. I thought the podcast was about me. It was all about me getting my one-liners in. It was all about my platform. And by the time he started telling me the story about he sat on a tube and the bloke opposite him's looking a bit interesting, and he's just come off his 4th tour of Afghanistan, and he knows the bloke opposite, and he comes out with this line, and he's Pakistani, and I know he's got a bomb in that rucksack. I thought, are we allowed to say Pakistani on a podcast? Is this podcast going to be finished before it begun? And then he goes on to tell this story that he just followed this guy off the tube, pinned him to the ground, got the station cleared. The military, the railway police turned up, gun to this guy's head, opened his rucksack, and it was full of sandwiches. And at that point, I was going, you can rip up the prep, because of course you go where your guest goes.
Yes, absolutely.
I've learned so much about having to quell my ego as a podcaster. And the second podcast I did, so I was hooked, but I could see I was very stilted. I hadn't really got the flow of it. And then my next guest was a lovely lady called Zelda, who's now past her 3rd form of incurable cancer, and she's now cancer-free. I mean, she's got a remarkable story. We did her podcast. I didn't talk a lot because I was so moved by my emotion that I actually shut up. And that podcast went to 35 countries in about 3 weeks. And in my other world of executive coaching, I remember somebody, and we'd had a really tough session. And 5 years later, they got back and said, "I didn't like what you had to say at the time, Catherine. In fact, I highly resisted it. But now I know that what you said was absolutely what I needed to hear. It was tough love, but I wasn't listening. But I get it now, and I want to thank you." And you know, I thought, thank goodness I didn't hold my breath for those 5 years.
Isn't it funny? Isn't it funny how sometimes like what you said about the tarot reader, the psychic, they don't people that are good communicators don't mince their words. They tell you what you need to hear. And it's not always thanked at the time.
No, if you're
Not
doing,
always.
and if you've got people around you, and this is the Buddhists have a term, and I love the idea of it. It's called a sangha. Now, you can't change your family, you can recruit your friends. But if you're using the Buddhist concept of Sangha, you surround yourself with people that are honest with you and they've cultivated sufficient emotional intelligence. And that's the skill set to say the right thing in the right spirit to the right person at the right time, so that you've got a chance of actually hearing the message, not being so brutalized by the way it's, you're pulling the thorns out so you can't actually get to what you need to hear. But I do know that one of the things about coaching has been, and you've experienced my work using strengths, is that I've done a job for 24 years that is not a natural fit for my personality. It took me 4 years to train as a psychotherapist. I'm not one. It took me 4 years to learn to listen. I was on permanent transmit. Okay. But one of the things that I've come to realize is that with podcasting, nothing is wasted. And
Mm.
what's joyful is when this goes live, you'll be like me. I've got a new podcast out on Friday. I will be all over the listens, because when you're working in this more intangible way in coaching, it's so lovely to see likes and listens and to get interaction. And because I've been a saleswoman all my life, I've never had a problem. I might purport to be an exec coach, I might be a podcaster, but in the tribe of sales, which I see incredibly your tribe, you consistently get people to do what you want them to do by being in the place that you're going to find them. You're on a podcast. Trojan, you're a significant figure in the community. You're going to places, you're making things happen. And by doing that, you're getting people to do what you want them to do. And it's a denigrated profession because we get people to do what we want them to do for charities. We get people to do stuff to fundraise. We get people to do stuff to get their skin in the game and help at a soup kitchen or to go and volunteer, because it's the skill set applied to a greater good.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad you touched on that greater good, because I know you are involved in lots of things, including raising lots of money with a great, I know you've worked with a few charities, you've done stuff. Is there anything you don't do? Is there anything that, because I know that you've been leading the way at the minute, you've had some fantastic, you talked about 40 people in your house for a fundraiser, but you've run some great events, definitely locally to us lately. So do you ever get any time off? Is fundraising kind of part of your thing? I know we're diverting from the podcast here, but there's so many great things.
It's all this. It's the podcast is just another way of getting people visibility for what they're about. And this is, if I go back to the question, what people aren't fundamentally getting about me, by and large, is when they see that I'm here, there, and everywhere, and I'm at the front of this and I'm doing that, they're not realizing that was everything I was born to be. So I was born to be expressive. I was born to be gregarious. I was born to speak and communicate. I was born to be positive, and I was born to leave people feeling in a good place. And I haven't got that right all of the time.
I think you've got it right a lot of the time, though. I mean, one of
I've
the
worked
reasons I
on it.
wanted to do on the podcast is you're a great storyteller. You are very good at being visible. And all of those things. Whether it's a charity event, whether it's your podcast, whether it's your executive coaching, or the team days that you do, you're very good at you being visible, but also helping others to be visible themselves, but in a way that really suits them.
So when we're doing, and this really comes back to sort of strength-based theory, what is abnormal about me and what is abnormal about you is the bit that makes you so distinctly different from everybody else. It was what you were born to be. So abnormally for me, put me in front of an audience of 1,000 people, raising something that makes people feel good, making them feel connected and encouraged. That's why I'll cook a meal, and holding that space and getting somebody I know that's a really great talker with a cause that really needs some money. I get energy. And I get energy a bit like I did a marathon once though, and it was like the full Monty. I like to say it because on my trajectory, if anybody was to vote 10 years ago, they would not have put marathon, they'd put wine bar. They would not have put a marathon, but I did it. Ultimately, when you have these gels, and they make you want to gag because they're horrible, but when you take them, you get about 4 more miles in your legs. And when I'm being what I'm meant to be, which is bringing great people together, the energy of connection, seeing this person, I have set off so many friendships. And a friend of mine said, "You're really generous with your friends." And I do not get upset when this new group of friends has formed from something I've organized, because my job is to find that next friend for that next person that will find something of a, so if I just stuck with the ones I got, I wouldn't be doing what I'm here to do. Don't get me wrong, I've got the core, I've got my left, I've
Yeah.
got my right. I couldn't do what I do without the people that, particularly my friend Sarah and Tintin, they come at 8:30 when I've got 30 round for breakfast, and they do the stuff that's about to tip me over. Typically, where's the knives and forks? I can co-create the food.
You're making me very hungry, Catherine, I have to say.
I'll trip over on the things that, well, we've got no cutlery. It's that sort of thing. It's when you get me down into detail. So going back to that, why do I do what I do? I'm a natural catalytic energy. So I'm not a sustainer. I don't want to really create something and just sustain it. That said, I've done that with the podcast because every new guest starts the whole thing all over again. But I can boom the energy in, say, let's do it, connect some good people together. And I think it's like a dog whistle. If you get the metrics of giving, if you understand that we can't just keep taking, that we've got to put something back, we've got to find the best way we can serve, because we've got to serve, because the pickle we're in at the moment is because ego's running the show and people are so in the service of themselves, you know. And so if you can find the thing that you're really meant to be doing, I get energy from it. And then I can see that helps other people. And it therefore becomes relatively effortless. I don't love the washing up. I do not love the washing up. But it's about finding those platforms. And if you're prepared to say, look, I'll take responsibility, I'll get some people along, I'll make it happen, I'm going to stick my head above the parapet. You've got a good ego. You wouldn't do what you do. You wouldn't be visible. You wouldn't run the risk of rejection, constantly asking to try and get people to do the right thing, unless you've got a degree of ego, because you would just not do it. And ego gets a really bad rap. Leaders, people that are prepared, people that govern the country, people that, you know, the legal system is all about people that have got a sufficient ego to take responsibility and do the jobs in the terms of Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird, one of my favorite books. You know, he did the job other men weren't prepared to do. He defended an innocent man in a town that was going to get him, you know, ostracized and put his kids in danger. And that's when you're really working from a value set. So podcasting for me is a convergence of coaching, training, curiosity, psychotherapy training, learning to shut up, connecting a group of really interesting people, having a heart and energy to land, be curious and go, to be willing to make all of that happen and run the risk of negative feedback and just suck it up, and to be prepared to stick my head out there and put it out on the socials. Because as an executive coach, I kept quiet for 20 odd years because I've got thousands of secrets in my head. And I felt that my clients wouldn't particularly love the idea that in any way, by me being visible, it would be in some way a compromise to them. But you can't get a podcast out there in the absence of it. So if you do check in with me on LinkedIn, and please do connect. If you do, you'll see it's podcaster, keynote speaker. I tuck in at the end the executive coaching bit, because I think there's something about the sacredness of being in service to people when they open their heart to you, that you feel that your information is safe. And this has been an area I think is going to be really interesting in the podcasting space, because I did an episode, it's out there, it was only about 3 episodes back, and it was a guy that was doing wild water swimming, David Barnes, and he looked a bit like Ant Middleton off, SAS, whatever, fit guy. He talked about how he'd lost 5 stone and he'd stopped drinking. So I invited him into the podcast studio. I didn't know his story. And I just thought we'd be going on a particular trajectory about finding himself through exercise and what. Anyway, about 10 minutes in, he said everything that caused me to be 5 stone overweight and drinking a bottle of vodka a day was essentially being sexually abused as a 5-year-old. Now, Stacey, I didn't know that was coming. And I didn't know whether that was coming because I put him on a platform with a microphone and he decided to tell the world, in which case the community he comes from would have been up the street with pitchforks if it was one of them, because it's only 7,000 people.
Yeah.
So, and then I'm thinking, how am I going to leave this guy in the right place? What am I thinking about in terms of my audience? And how much sleep will it cost me?
There is a lot in that second for a podcaster, especially you're very aware of your guests. You're very aware of those messages and the stories. Your executive coaching almost comes into play.
Absolutely.
It's very hard to balance all that in that instant that you are recording.
And that's why nothing is wasted in life. So if I hadn't done the psychotherapy training, if I hadn't worked on the fact I'm a compulsive rescuer, if I hadn't understood as an empath that I can tap into stuff very quickly and can lose copious amounts of sleep if I feel I've done something wrong. There's an intimacy about this space. What you and I are doing, we're having an intimate conversation. At some point, it will go out there, and it will not be us anymore. It'll go beyond us. And there is a responsibility when you're chasing your listens. And I want to get in the mood. I had to have such a long night with the souls. I write about it in my book, Gobsmacked, when I suddenly realized that what was I doing it for? I was counting countries. I got so addicted to when do I get to 100 countries? These are human beings opening themselves up. And the audience, you can't take responsibility for the audience, but you've got to protect, or at least you've got to leave people in a place where they're not burdened by loads of unresolved stuff. Because, that's not really what people signed up to. You've got to sort of almost take them and your guests to a point of some degree of resolution in about 30 odd minutes. And you can open, as you and I talked before we went and pressed the record button, you would not know that I would have you in the stories I've told, but that's what happens. And it's about being, in everything that we do, being conscious of our responsibilities in putting people, for a while I was a photographer, and when you put a lens in somebody's face, I remember doing a wedding and I could tell as soon as I took a photograph of the bride, I knew she didn't want to go through it. She didn't want to get married. She did not want to marry this man. You try and photograph a bride that's got regrets, that's going through the motions, and that lens, because it's so penetrative, expose that in her. A microphone or a sense of, I'm going to be on the telly, or I'm going to be on a podcast. People sometimes get pulled into revealing stuff that if they'd thought about it, they wouldn't want out there. And you don't want to leave people lesser by you flying through their lives. And so I think, going back to your bigger question about, I get involved in a lot of stuff because I lost my mum when I was 18, and she lived, in my view, a very small life. She had 4 kids. She never learnt to drive. If she could get a lift to Sainsbury's every 3 weeks, that was massive. She was a bright woman, massively underfulfilled, and she was gone at 41. And I made a decision that I would not live a small life. And I've gone at warp. I have gone at warp, but I've been blessed with a lot of energy and a strong sense of purpose. And so far, so good. I'm 60 next year, and I've got really irrationally excited about it, because they're the sort of numbers when you lose a parent young, there's no gift in. There's no gift. And now, of course, listening to all the different podcasts, when people have a gobsmacked moment, we've had some happy ones, don't get me wrong, but by and large, most people's biggest motivator to change is when they've hit rock bottom. And I've listened to people with, terminal illness diagnosis, or they've had something so catastrophic happen to them that they have a real left and right choice about whether they succumb to a life of victimhood and
Yeah.
or that they channel it and pull themselves out. And so I just feel that with the exceptional times that we're living in, and they are exceptional times, you look what's happening in America. You look what's happened in 2 weeks, from two old blokes fighting it out and trading insults to suddenly a mobilized America. You know, our own
And
election.
that could have been a very different outcome.
Yeah,
It
I mean,
really
it's now just got electric. And what I think we can celebrate, having just done our own general election, is we all went to a quintessential polling station. Nobody was giving us jip. Nobody's life was in danger. We didn't have to queue for 400 hours. We were able to go through a democratic process peacefully. It's an amazing thing that we've got in this country that sometimes I just don't think we fully appreciate. So starting back with, we're on a global platform now. We're in a global world. Podcasting has collapsed the world. It's an exciting thing. But by and large, because we do have the chance to edit, we're sending information over there that we would want people to receive. The other side, the dark side of this, is sometimes you reveal stuff about yourself that's in your blind spot and you're not realizing just what you've said about yourself. And you have to be the person that rides that out as well when you've put that out there, because it's one thing opening up your guests, but it's not really right that you don't get your own skin in the game. And sometimes that's really uncomfortable. I had an article done about me because I've got a new column in the Courier, and I didn't share it on Facebook. So I didn't share it because I felt shaky about rejection. And I think that if people read my life, 3 husbands down, lots of chaos. Oh, is that what an executive coach should look like? Is that what a president of Seroptimus should look like? But that was my life. And then bit by bit, I thought, look, I've just got to own this. It's that
Yeah.
shakiness. Because it's, we all fear, if it's like public speaking, something you've seen I'm involved in. When you get up on the stage, you fear rejection, you
Yeah.
fear humiliation, and you fear death. And part of death to ego is when stuff goes out about you that shows you to be in an unfavorable light. And that's the thing. News can be across the globe in seconds now. And that's the duality of this super hyper connected world, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I love the fact you've just said there about sensitivity. And we're kind of I'm going to bring this back now, because we said we'd do about half an hour. We're on 28 minutes. I could chat to you all day, actually. And I love the fact that you've really woven some stories in there about your podcast guests as well. Now, one thing I love about you, Catherine, and you have said, you're high energy, you do all these amazing things. You talked earlier about chasing you were looking at where the listeners were, you'd got your map out. You've got an incredible story, and I've not heard of another podcaster doing this. I'm sure there will be some out there, but you actually went to find your listeners, didn't you? Tell us about that, because there will be some of my listeners that, are new to you, and I want them to go and see this incredible journey that you went on.
It was impulsive, and I'm sure I could have made more of it if I'd thought it all through. But what it happens is, when you get your podcast listens, you get all your countries, then you get all the states so everywhere. So you'll see Leamington, Banbury, Stratford. You'll see every place where people have listened, and it's really exciting. And consistently, it was about 2 years ago, I'd had the podcast out for 2 years. My highest listening place in America was 33 either listens or listeners in a place called Cumming, Cuming. So on there, I've got New York, I've got Los Angeles, but 33 was my highest number of listens in America. And I just thought, who are these people? Why me? Because when I checked out Cumming, it's a city of 7,000 people. I mean, Leamington Spa is like 70 odd, and we're a town. This is a city. And I just thought, and in December, I thought, imagine these people tune in every month to me. What if I could just go and say hello and share a cup of coffee with them? So I organised, I got on a flight, and you know what? This is the power of a network. So a lady called Sam Garman picked up on the fact I was going from the Leamington Courier. Her brother, Smurf, ran the cricketers in Leamington.
Yeah.
She's been out in a place called Marietta for 20 odd years, and she runs a place that you go for expats go for Angel Delight or Ritz Crackers or HP Sauce. And
Nice.
she and her and another lady called Chantel Wright, who was another Brit who had a fish and chip shop in Cumming, invited me as guests. So I just spent 6 hours in a fish and chip shop, not very peachy at the end of it. And then another day I spent in a sort of a classic British expat place, surrounded by Coventry City flags because Sam's a massive fan. Right. And bit by bit, so I think about 4 listeners came forward. The first time one came through, her name was Claire, and she was from Newcastle. And I
Amazing.
literally fell into her arms. We'd had a very sizable haddock and fries because obviously we were there for 6 hours. But it was just having this one woman, Claire, made my entire trip validated. But I look about it was just utter madness. But the local press loved it. It went on to the local news, the local radio. I was front page on the local press, and they just loved the fact that this batty Englishman with a hat went over to find her listeners. But of course, what I was divining was British listeners had moved out to Atlanta. But you know what? If I was to give you the amount of listens I've got now in Cumming,
I can imagine.
Atlanta, Marietta, by me getting in the plane and going and saying hi, I've amplified the listenership around that little epicenter. So it's morphed out. And they come back every month, which is good. They didn't just do it once out of loyalty. They come back every month. So it was utter madness. But I don't think that one listener I've got in the reunion island last week, I've just looked at it. I can't justify going all that way for one listener on an island.
What we're saying is we need to tag in those islands. We need to promote it. Maybe we could do a joint. Maybe we'll get some listeners for the BSN over there and we'll both go over. Come on, make it happen, folks.
It was just such fun and madness, pure madness. But it
was one of those things, and maybe this says more about me than it does about you. I was watching it happen, like kind of real time on your socials, in the press, and I'm sat there going, this is a woman of my own heart here. This is the kind of crazy stuff that I would do. You know, I was someone, and my husband rolls his eyes every time I say this, but at 16, you know, I jumped on a plane. I went and moved abroad. My dad didn't know for 4 months, and he basically turned around to my mum and said, is Stacey avoiding me because she hasn't paid the rent? No, she's gone to live in a different country. Well, why is she going to do that then? Because she's living her life, you know? This was it. So for 6 months at 16, I'd buggered off. I came back. Now I'm pretty sure my husband hides my passport in case I get any crazy ideas. But honestly, I sat there watching it all going, oh, I want to do something like this. I'm sat here now going, oh, I might have to get the podcast map out. Where can we go? Honestly, your energy just oozes from you, and I love it. And I want to, if you're listening to this and you've got a podcast and you've done something similar, or you know, you're thinking maybe that we're both crazy and you'd never do that, we want to hear from you. We want to hear the kind of what you think, because I just think, you know, going off to America to find your listeners, honestly, lady, I am absolutely in awe. I love it. Absolutely love it.
Well, I wonder, I loved the adventure of it all, but it was just at the end of the day, it was human connection and it was fascination. As just wanted to understand what I'd never had any, I never ever found out what got us started over there, why that place. There's about 80,000, as I say, expats in and around Atlanta. They came over with Coca-Cola, they came over with BT. So there's something, but when you're in an expat community, there was a connectedness. It was really interesting how they all knew each other. And so it was word of mouth. Whichever way it was, I wouldn't have said I solved the mystery, but it got me mobilized to want to go and find out. But there's something quite anonymous about podcasting in some regards.
Unless you tell somebody, nobody knows what you're listening to. Nobody knows the influences that you are taking in through a podcast.
Yeah, so you put yourself in little boxes and we're on a virtual platform, and you could end up you could do it all day and actually not leave the house. And I think what our hearts, the community work I've seen you do, the way you bring people, at the end of the day, Human beings get energy from deep connection, from feeling that they're understood and that they're meeting for a cup of coffee, or they're meeting old friends. And if you're not out fishing, you're meant to be mending your nets, going out and meeting people, re-establishing your bonds, because ultimately our way out of some of these bizarre times is small groups of people. Primarily, I bring women together by and large, being together, learning together, looking to do things in the community, raising up the lives of other people, because that energy of giving is keeping the world order good. And what we've got to keep the good flowing, we've got to keep the kindness flowing, we've got to get people the way they can speak their truth without fear of being decimated or attacked. You know, I've gone to
Actually, you're everything you're saying now. You've really raised my energy this morning. Definitely, I'm. We're in week 2 of the summer holidays. There's children buzzing around my house. It could be very easy to get into that juggling kind of mindset. But you've definitely raised my energy. And I was chatting to a charity last week actually, and they were saying that the more they grow, the more they do, the more negative and obstruction from other people that they're seeing, they're hearing, and it's quite upsetting for them. And you have the conversations where I'm building them back up. I'm saying, it says more about them than you, but it's quite a hard sector, isn't it? It's quite hard to keep that energy high. You need to surround yourself with those cheerleaders, with your friends, with your supporters, because otherwise those negative voices can really kind of impact on your journey, on your destination, on your opportunities to do good, right?
Oh, yes, because who supports this, the supporters of the supporter is a very key role.
Who
And
motivates the motivator?
and I've had a very checkered romantic past. It took me a while to settle down, but I've been with my husband, John, with 16, about to be married 14 years. And when I have, say, 20 odd women around for breakfast, he's in the kitchen and he's washing up. And he stays by my side because he knows I get absolutely out there because I overdo it. And he mops up for me and he washes up and he's quietly there because he gets that that's what I'm here to do, to connect people and to bring them together and put a good feed on. And he knows that he can get energy from washing up and sticking at something in a way that I just want to collapse to the floor and disappear into a mound of hair and a lump of wax, because it's just like, oh, I can, that bit.
Why do I now need to wash
That bit, Elvis has left the building when we start tidying up. But we're all, sometimes when you're a big energy, but I know I've met your husband, he's a solid supporter of yours. And the people that stand by our sides and take our phone calls when somebody's had a chip at us or just calm us down, they're quieter roles, but we absolutely need them. You need the big gobs getting out there doing the stuff, mobilizing. But the big gobs typically are people that are carrying wounds, have had some stuff that they're trying to resolve, have a strong sense of purpose, but not always most self-aware about the impact they make. Therefore, have to start patching things up as they light bonfires and have to get people to put them out. So, we need people in the tag team and to help us. And I think it's the wisdom to say thank you, and also to say that what you and I have done today means that it will only really come to life if somebody listens.
Oh, absolutely. And I can't wait to sit there and say to you, Catherine, we've got listeners here and here for your episode. It'll be brilliant. And it gives us an excuse to catch up, maybe over a G&T when you're back from your holidays.
Thank you.
You've been an amazing guest. I love the micro stories that have been in here, stories of your guests. Now, I'm guessing people are going to want to know, where they can find you and where they can find your podcast. So please do share with everybody, where's the best place to find you? Where's the best place to connect with you? But also, how can they find your Gobsmacked podcast?
So I always say, go to Spotify and look for Gobsmacked. And if you see a lurching set of lips, you found me. But Acast, I'm on every podcast. So Gobsmacked is on Spotify. There's a lesser known podcast called Gobstopper, which is 12 episodes that are all in the leadership space. They're much more around. So stuff around imposter syndrome, resilience. And we've just done one that's been hugely successful about what Jurgen Klopp can teach us about leadership. People have really engaged with that. So Gobsmack, Gobstopper, I've got a website called gobsmack.me, bang. And please connect with me on LinkedIn. I've got Gobsmacked on Instagram. I've got Gobsmacked on TikTok. Docs. I'm working with TikTok. I do think it has a dark side, but I'm sure it's got an option. But I'm just sort of sat with TikTok at the moment. And Insta Gobsmack. Just find those lips and travel. That's about all I need to say.
I love that. Find those lips and travel. There we go. Catherine, you've been a superstar. As I said, you've definitely raised my energy today. I don't think there'll be anybody listening that would say any different. You are definitely a raiser of energy. And thank you for joining me. You've been incredible. And I never know what we're going to talk about until we start that conversation. So I just thank you.
Thank you.
Folks, for those of you that have been listening, I've been Stacey Calder. We've had joined by the brilliant Catherine Williamson, and I'm gobsmacked. There you go. What more can I say? I've been gobsmacked. This is the Business Success Network podcast. Please do remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next issue.